Hey folks, did you know that an estimated 5 billion plastic hand soap and cleaning bottles are thrown away each year? And if that's not bad enough, most cleaning formulas are 90% water. That's heavy to ship, it leads to excessive carbon emissions, and also those products are often filled with nasty ingredients like chlorine and ammonia. And I hate to tell you this, but a lot of us are eating and drinking roughly a credit card's worth of plastic a week. Ugh. Those microplastics. It's gross. But Blue Land sets out to do something about it, eliminating the need for single-use plastics in the products we reach for the most. Blue Land is on a mission to eliminate single-use plastic by reinventing cleaning essentials to be better for you and the planet with the same powerful clean that you're used to. The idea is simple. They offer refillable cleaning products with a beautiful, cohesive design that looks great on your counter. Fill your reusable bottles with water, just drop the tablets in, and wait for them to dissolve. You'll never have to grab bulky cleaning supplies on your grocery run if you're like me and you don't have a car. That can be difficult walking back from the grocery store. But with Blue Land, they make it super easy. Refills start at just $2.25. You can even set up a subscription or buy in bulk for additional savings. Blue Land products are independently tested to perform alongside major brands that are free of dyes, bleach, and harsh chemicals. From cleaning sprays to hand soap, toilet bowl cleaner, and laundry tablets, all Blue Land products are made with clean ingredients so you can feel good about them. Blue Land is trusted in over 1 million homes, including mine, and including this office, so I guess that counts for double. Our hand soap, at home, we don't have a dishwasher here, but I use the detergent. It comes in a really cute little blue tin that once I run out, I kind of want to use for a different purpose. Although I guess once, because of my subscription, yeah, I can just refill it. Maybe I need to get two so I can use the other tin for another it's really cute. That's really what I'm working backwards from. Blue Land has a special offer for listeners. Right now, get 15% off your first order by going to blueland.com/majority. You won't want to miss this. Blueland.com/majority for 15% off. That's blueland.com/majority to get 15% off. Now, time for the show.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
And I get the feeling you've been cheated.
It is Thursday, May 22nd, 2025. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, David Hearst of Middle East Eye will be with us to talk about his recent piece, Israel has already lost the Gaza war, it just doesn't know it yet. And later in the show, Benjamin Fogel joins us to talk about Trump ambushing the South African president in a Zelensky-esque fashion and pushing false claims of white genocide. Also on the program, House Republicans passed Trump's big, beautiful bill in the middle of the night with a party line vote. If adopted by the Senate, the bill would cut taxes for the rich, throw 10 million Americans off of Medicaid, and would be the deepest food assistance cut in SNAP history. In the middle of an affordability crisis, as tariffs are going to raise prices and the economy is headed towards recession. 2 Israeli embassy staff members were shot and killed last night outside a Jewish museum in Washington, D.C. Trump's DOJ to drop Biden-era police reform agreements in Louisville and Minneapolis, which were started in response to the Black Lives Matter protests. In related news, investigators say a fire at a historically black Memphis church was set intentionally. A deadlocked 4-4 Supreme Court blocks Oklahoma from opening the United States' first public religious charter school. Amy Coney Barrett had recused herself, which made the difference here. It's rare good news. Trump tried to give South Africa's president, as I mentioned, the Zelensky treatment yesterday. But it didn't go so well for the White House. They scrubbed the transcript of the meeting from the website. Tonight, Trump is hosting a bribery gala. The top purchasers of his meme coin get to go hang out with the president, including a shady Chinese crypto billionaire who previously had been too worried to come to the United States because he thought he'd get arrested.
It's rough out there for crypto billionaires.
I mean, but now he gets a lovely dinner at Mar-a-Lago for, I don't know how much he paid for it, but must be really good food. Another plane crash, this time in San Diego. Trump privately tells European leaders that Putin isn't ready to end the war in Ukraine. You don't say! And lastly, ProPublica finds that more than a dozen executive branch and congressional employees sold lots of stock right before Liberation Day tanked the markets. What a coinky-dink. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Or, as I should say, a Majority Report. I gotta be better with this branding here. Hello, Russ. Hello, Matt. Hello to everyone in the audience. Let's get going. We've got two great guests today. So this big, beautiful bill that the Republicans just passed in the House, and they're going to be sending it over to the Senate, if adopted by the Senate wholesale, that's not going to happen. There will be tweaks, but they're starting at such an extreme level that we should be deeply concerned about what comes out the other end, regardless of Senate input. This bill adds over $3 trillion to the deficit in 10 years. As an aside, can you imagine if this was a Democratic bill, like what the top line headline would be about the deficit and what was being added to it? If Democrats wanted to increase social spending but not add enough taxes to offset it, the headline would contain every zero. But because it's tax cuts, disproportionately helping the wealthy and the poorest amongst us, who are on Medicaid or on SNAP, are the ones that are going to be affected. It's just different framing.
It's evil framing.
Yeah.
It's taking food out of people's mouths framing.
The headlines in every paper and on every cable news channel would show like every zero in that $3 trillion deficit number, and they have like flaming, put horns on the zeros. Like this is going to kill America. It's just, it's crazy to see how the immiseration of people is just not spoken about with the same urgency in our media class that adding benefits would create.
Are people that might be harmed by, say, the largest cut of food assistance, are they represented in our media?
Unfortunately, no. And I think that's why someone like AOC is really important. We unfortunately lost two of our other members who are more connected to working class issues in Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman because AIPAC took them out. But we still have members of the squad standing up, representing the interests of working people. Here she is talking about what this bill is. The Republicans rushed this through in the middle of the night last night. She's speaking here in particular about Medicaid.
13.7 million Americans. 13.7 million Americans are the number of people in this country whose health care are going to be stripped in this bill. Now, Republicans are going to try to tell you every single distraction in the book from that essential number. I want people at home to understand that Medicaid and the federal matching funds for Medicaid can make up 30 to 40% of some of the state budgets that we have going on back in your home. Republicans have put this bill together rushed it together in a matter of hours on the back of a napkin, shaking it, walking out of the White House, and brought it right here to this floor. They are defunding Planned Parenthood. They are ending tons of Medicaid coverage for 13.7 million Americans, including Affordable Care Act coverage as well. And if you want to get an abortion and have a silver plan on a health care plan that you paid for, you will also be affected by this legislation as well. Also, allowing suppressors on guns to be deregulated to some of the largest amounts that we have seen since the 1930s. This is just a Christmas bill.
I yield, gentlelady, she'll 30 seconds.
And so I want people to understand, for my Republican colleagues who are sure what is in and not in this bill, in this process that has been this rushed, when you wake up in the morning, you will realize that you voted to defund Planned Parenthood and to take away health care from 13.7 million Americans. And when this country wakes up in the morning, there will be consequences to pay for this. And I yield back.
Gentlelady yields.
Well said. The bill, we're still getting these numbers because, as she says, they rushed it through last night, which is what people do when they're doing good things, right? You pass bills in the dead of night and don't allow much debate on it. These are the numbers. Let's talk about the tax cuts first, and then we'll touch on Medicaid. We've shown this graph before, but I think it's quite effective. Popular Information, Judd Legum and crew put this together, showing the distributional effects of the big, beautiful bill. Trump's, I guess, riffing off of Build Back Better. It's so stupid.
Never an original thought.
Yeah. All grievance. You see the first quintile, so if you're making up to $17K of earners, you're losing around $1,000 in after-tax income by 2026. That second quintile, so this is, what, like half the country here? No, quintile. Two-fifths. I did. The Cardinal sent me trying to do math on the fly.
I mean, it's close enough.
I was like conflating quintile and quarter, which is not true. But 17K to 51K in terms of earners, they're losing $705 in after-tax income in 2026 by income level. Let's just fast forward to the top 0.1% who are adding $4.3 million in after-tax income in 2026. That's as jarring as it gets.
They're going to create jobs. And I mean, this is all in the context of, people like David Sachs in February. I mean, the U.S. now has World War II levels of indebtedness without fighting a world war. Well, I would say we're kind of helping a genocide. Is that close enough to a World War II comparison?
Yeah.
So where did all this money go? The greatest generation incurred debt for defeat from blah, blah, blah. They're worried about this debt, right? But that is just like the sort of border hysteria about immigrants. That's just to drive people's lizard brain as these people steal money and make sure they take more from themselves, even more than they would, under a situation where they're not. Everyone listening to this knows that these people aren't taxed nearly enough.
We know that Republicans increase the deficit and the debt every time they get into power. Bush did. Trump 1 did. This bill is supposed to increase the federal deficit by $3.8 trillion.
Reagan did Star Wars. I mean,
it's just because it's a fig leaf for austerity. And to go back to my point at the start of our segment on this, if this was more accurately reported, perhaps Americans would have a better understanding of the true motivations behind this. But austerity treatment gets a different kind of coverage than broad-based social programs that are coming towards people gets. Just compare the Bernie Sanders agenda and how that was spoken about and how the spending was discussed in that. How are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? Republicans are cutting all of these programs, and the non-partisan Congressional Budget Office says it will increase the deficit by $3.8 trillion, and it's like, ho-hum. What are we going to do about it?
Which quintile owns your newspaper? Or which quintile owns the cable network that you see?
Right.
Which quintile owns all this stuff? Which quintile owns the politicians that are voting on this stuff?
Yep. The cuts to SNAP, food assistance that over 40 million Americans rely on a monthly basis are the deepest in the history of the program. When AOC's talking about the Medicaid cuts, Matt, you've talked about this a lot, but this is really important for people to understand. More than 66 million Americans live in areas that are classified as rural. Rural hospitals need Medicaid. 1/3 of rural hospitals in the U.S. are at risk of closure due to financial instability. The Affordable Care Act, when it expanded Medicaid to adults who have incomes that are up to 138% of the federal poverty level, they expanded Medicaid coverage to around 20 million people. This has been a success of the Affordable Care Act. And that expansion kept rural hospitals afloat.
Yep.
It kept them afloat because they have very low margins, but they need the capacity to take care of populations without making the money that, say, like a New York City or a Los Angeles hospital would be making. And there's been analyses done of Medicaid expansion states versus rural hospitals in non-Medicaid expansion states. 40 states expanded Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act. The 10 that didn't, Chartist Group found that the non-expansion states have rural hospitals that are 62% more likely to close than in states with Medicaid expansion. And around half of rural hospitals already conduct their operations with negative margins. So with this slashing of Medicaid, you're not just stripping tens of millions or millions of Americans of their health care coverage. It's not just that they lose insurance. You're devastating communities, rural communities.
I mean, better outcomes for women and infants, and nearly 50% in rural areas covered by Medicaid. And this is the same administration that acts like it's natalist or something like that. No, it's eugenicist.
Exactly. And J.D. Vance is that guy, right? He acts like he's the exception that came out of poverty because of how talented he is. But for everybody else, it's time to make them a little bit more desperate so they can become a guy like J.D. Vance.
The guy who changes his name and religion several times as he climbs the ladder and turns his back on the people he supposedly represents.
He's the bad kind of class traitor.
Exactly.
But to wrap up here, just about how important Medicaid is. Medicaid, there are around 7 million Americans over 65 years old who are enrolled in Medicaid. You may ask, well, why is that the case? That's when Medicare kicks in. But Medicare only pays for short-term nursing home stays. Medicaid pays for longer-term nursing home stays for low-income people. What happens when that goes away? Elder care is already so expensive that it's literally like putting these older people's kids into debt. It's and the places where lower income people even go and can use Medicaid payments, oftentimes they're rife with abuse. The system is already sadistic. On top of this, we're attacking nursing home care for that 7 million cohort, those 7 million people over 65 who are enrolled in Medicaid and likely need that additional assistance on top of their Medicare to take care of their health care at that stage of their life.
And, this is going to not only hurt mothers and elderly people, but like you said, this is a slashing of the investment to our public health facilities. And we have been doing this for too long, actually. And this is just an acceleration of the lack of investment that we need to keep these hospitals alive. That's why when Bernie Sanders was running, he's talking about what we can do to support rural hospitals. It's sick that the small town that my mom was from had a hospital in the 70s that it doesn't anymore. Like, we're going backwards. Society is decaying around us.
And remember how we talked about this too within the context of public schools and why public schools are such a threat to Republicans and why there are a bunch of Republican states trying to curb free school and public lunches, and they attacked Tim Walz for expanding that in Minnesota. Hospitals, schools, these are like the very few pins that are holding communities together. And that's a threat to Republicans. It's a threat to conservatives. When you have community and you have shared understanding and you have centers of society that are state funded and are not for profit, you are a threat to the conservative project. And that's why they're targeting all of these institutions. All right, we're going to be speaking to David Hearst in just a sec, but first, a word from some of our sponsors. Just like animal predators aim for the slowest prey, hackers target people with the weakest security. And if you're not using ExpressVPN, that's you. You're like a babe in the woods without protection. But ExpressVPN is here to help, and I'd like to thank ExpressVPN for supporting the Majority Report. Visit expressvpn.com/majority, and you can get an extra 4 months free. Every time you connect to an unencrypted network anywhere, your online data is not secure. That's airports, that's hotels, that's coffee shops. Any hacker on the same network can gain access to and steal your personal data, passwords, bank logins, credit card details, etc. It does not take much technical knowledge to hack somebody. Just some cheap hardware is needed, and a smart 12-year-old could basically do it. Your data is valuable. Hackers can make up to $1,000 a person selling personal info on the dark web. ExpressVPN encrypts 100% of your network traffic to keep your data safe from hackers when you are on public Wi-Fi. It works on all of your devices. One click, tap the button, turn it on, you're protected. It's that easy on your phone, your laptop, your tablet, and more. ExpressVPN is essential when I travel for those very reasons. Airport Wi-Fi. I mean, I occasionally like to do some work at the coffee shop or at my little gym cafe. You gotta switch it on. Secure your online data today by visiting expressvpn.com/majority. That's expressvpn.com/majority. And you can get an extra 4 months free. That's expressvpn.com/majority. You can get an extra 4 months free. expressvpn.com/majority. This will be below in the YouTube and episode description, all of those links and that information. And lastly, did you know that the CDC says that fewer men than women meet the minimum daily intake recommendations for fruits and veggies? And men are more likely to overvalue exercise and undervalue nutrition. Well, this is what Ritual is here for. It's a multivitamin that is scientifically developed for men to help fill nutrient gaps in their diets. Sam is a ritualistic user of Ritual. It's very helpful because he doesn't have to think about it. It's a science-backed multivitamin for men 18 and older with high-quality, traceable key ingredients and clean, bioavailable forms. Omega-3 DHA to help support heart and brain health, vitamin D3 to support normal muscle and immune function. It contains 10 key nutrients in 2 delayed-release capsules designed for optimal absorption per day. It's designed to be gentle on the stomach with a minty essence in every bottle that helps make taking your multis actually enjoyable. The Ritual multivitamins are vegan, non-GMO, project verified, gluten and major allergen-free, and made traceable. What's great about Ritual, Sam's talked about this, is that he doesn't have to worry about it. Ritual sends him the next bottle, the next round when he's run out, because you can do a subscription service there. And then you don't have to worry about just forgetting to take your multivitamin. Essential for Men is a quality multivitamin from a company you can actually trust. Get 25% off your first month for a limited time at ritual.com/majority. That's ritual.com/majority for 25% off your first month. Again, ritual.com/majority for 25% off your first month. We will put a link in the YouTube and episode descriptions to all of that below. All right, quick break, and when we come back, we'll be joined by David Hearst. We are back, and we are joined now by David Hearst, co-founder and editor-in-chief of Middle East Eye. His recent piece for Middle East Eye is entitled, "Israel Has Already Lost the Gaza War. It Just Doesn't Know It Yet." David, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
So I almost want to start with where your piece ends, with this sentence. Israel may win each battle, as the Americans did in Vietnam, but it will lose the war. Can we work back from there? What brings you to that hypothesis based on what we've seen of, a year and a half of genocide at this point?
Well, it's not an original thought. It's been said by quite a few people who have actually fought quite hard on Israel's behalf, not least its former Mossad chief. It is the feeling that they win every battle because technologically they're just so far superior to the Palestinians and what the Palestinians can reply. But that there are two things that Israel is not under Israel's control. It can't crush the Palestinian spirit, or as the Palestinians would say, the Palestinian resistance, which could be violent or non-violent. And the more it tries to basically kill, the more it's actually hitting a civilian population and just generating another generation of fighters in 10, 20 years' time, which is exactly who is fighting this war right now. If you think of the generation that's fighting this war, this is a post-Oslo generation that has seen no progress since Oslo in their own national aspirations, and some have sold their taxes for guns, and I've interviewed them. The other thing that has changed in this war is international opinion, and that's where the parallel with Vietnam comes in. In fact, if you go back, LBJ was told by the CIA in 1967 that there was a stalemate with the Viet Cong, but it took 7 more years to actually pull out. And another president under Nixon to pull out of Vietnam. Here, what we have is a quite rapidly deteriorating situation of Israel's image internationally, and I think there is a marked change of tone now. 18 months on, for me, everything that Israel has been criticized of today could have been said in October or November 2023. But the fact that it's being said now is I think, interesting.
What do you make of that then? Is it what do you make of the change in kind of liberal posture towards this? And we can expand outside of the United States here. The European Union, I know, said, I guess, 2 days ago that they're reviewing their political agreements with Israel. You see the Prime Minister in the UK with a little bit more of a chiding tone towards the Israelis. Where do you see that shift having happened?
Yeah, and there's also a joint statement of condemnation by Britain, France, and Canada. And that could lead to an early recognition of the state of Palestine by all 3 countries in the not too distant future. Now, I don't know. I just don't know what has led to this, because for someone like me that's been covering this and covering every death, not me personally, my website, every doctor killed, every hospital destroyed, every child starved to death, you can say, why now? What's actually changed? Is it statements about mass starvation coming from the UN? Is it because Israel has only today allowed 90 trucks in after, I think, 11 weeks of total blockade? Was it the clumsy attempt to cover up the killings of those Red Crescent first responders in Rafah? Is it the fear that when the International Court of Justice actually comes to a ruling on genocide, every leader that allowed Israel's campaign to continue under a spurious banner of a right to defend itself could be regarded in law as an enabler of genocide? Or is it lip gloss, another form of cover? Now, the cynic in me says it's the latter, because hours after the British Foreign Secretary David Lammy announced sanctions on Israel, an RAF plane took off from a British base of Akrotiri in Cyprus to conduct a surveillance mission over Gaza. And Lammy is not suspending arms supplies or parts of drones or parts for the F-35s. So, and only weeks before, Lammy met his counterpart, Gideon Saar, Israeli foreign minister, in what was called a private visit. And yet Saar is a key member of the cabinet that collectively stopped all food going into Gaza. So you could say this is just to cover a very shaky position. But that said, I think the cumulative effect on Israel will be real diplomatically.
You mentioned the Oslo process. Can you take us back a little bit into that history and explain to people how that more pro-Israel agreement than is traditionally written about in the West aided and abetted, I guess, the choking off of potential diplomacy in the aftermath of it, and increase the level of, I guess, impunity that Israel has experienced in the decades since.
Yeah, before just going into that thing, that there's something very, very concrete that Oslo allowed. Oslo allowed the biggest wave of settlement of the West Bank in the history of the conflict. And so you had peace, and you had this massive and sudden wave of settlers turning up in the West Bank. I forget the numbers, but if you go back over the figures, it's very clear that I think Oslo produced for Israel something like 325,000 settlers that hadn't been there before. So that's what was a gain for the concept of Greater Israel, because you've got to remember that Israel's not terribly interested in Gaza biblically or historically or ideologically or religiously. It is far more interested in the West Bank, which it continues to call Judea and Samaria. What Oslo did was provide a process that never came to anything for the Palestinians, but provided concrete gains for the Israelis. Settlers, I've already mentioned, but it also provided this paradigm, or this myth, that if only the Palestinians got themselves together, they had the right leadership, if only there was the right alignment of stars with the Israeli public, you would have a Palestinian state, which of course never ever happened. And that all of that has come, the basis of what I would call the Friends of Israel or liberal Zionism, the idea, the belief in a homeland for the Jews that could enable, that was an Israel for all its citizens, that could also enable a Palestinian state to be born in a two-state solution. That has very much crumbled in Benjamin Netanyahu's hands. And he has really set himself a life's mission of preventing, stifling a Palestinian state at birth. That is what he will go down in history for, and that is what he's proudest of. He says it openly now. And in fact, on the question of a Palestinian state, this is the one issue in a very, very divided Israel, which has Israelis say a civil war boiling between liberals and hardliners on the judicial front. That's one point of agreement. that there are votes in the Knesset which are near 100% votes on the question of whether a Palestinian state should ever be allowed to be born. There's complete consensus on the Palestinian question between the so-called opponents of Netanyahu and Netanyahu himself. And that
answer is no. That answer is no, basically.
Basically the answer is no. And I think the international community have yet to catch up with the reality that a two-state solution was something that could have happened with the Arab Peace Initiative in 2002, the Saudi Arabian plan, but that train has left the station.
Yes. I mean, there was, I think, some polling out of the University of Tel Aviv that shows that an overwhelming majority of Israelis support Donald Trump's ethnic cleansing plan for Gaza. So the scope of what is liberal and what is conservative thought within Israel is quite different than I think a lot of Westerners would like to imagine, or what we've been told about what political consensus is in Israel. But the part that's just so striking to me is we've been having conversations about how Biden's foreign policy was so disastrous in part because he had this very archaic commitment to the post-World War II system of alliances and not speaking to enemies, but building up NATO, building up AUKUS, and not being hawkish with China, not re-engaging in the Iran nuclear deal, which was Obama's arguably greatest foreign policy achievement during that time period. You have Trump come in, right? And he's breaking down the traditional liberal foreign policy orthodoxy, eschewing liberal interventionism, and saying, this is a failed strategy, which he's right about. But then at the same time, it just feels like that is just about enriching himself, right? So I'm grateful to see this kind of change in this national security pattern and orthodoxy and this death spiral that we've all been watching. But if it's not paired with a policy of restraining Israel, then I guess, is there a benefit just purely to breaking up this orthodoxy or this way of thinking? Because it just seems like Trump is mostly only interested in corruption here.
Well, I mean, I think that's a very, very good point, and I can't really answer it in a short form. I mean, I think the Biden's foreign policy collapsed under the weight of what was going on in Gaza, and I think he had levers and he had room to conduct liberal interventionism and continue to conduct that classic set of foreign policy, which failed in Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, Libya, Syria, and Russia. When I was in Russia during in the 1990s, that was a form of liberal interventionism, completely collapsed. It produced Putin. But he still had the opportunity or the wiggle room within that failed policy of applying a lot more pressure on Netanyahu, principally by cutting off the arms and saying so. But Netanyahu knew he never would. Netanyahu's got a very, very clear reading of what's going on in Capitol Hill. And he's always had an iron grip on analysis of just how weak the Democrats are, and how he can manipulate the Republicans. And it could now be, paradoxically, that Trump, who's only interested in his pocket and where the next golf course is going, and his next visit to the Queen, and how much money he's loading up in his personal coffers, complete corruption, could actually prove more of a problem to Netanyahu than Biden could, because he really doesn't. He only thinks in transactional terms doesn't think of good or evil. He doesn't care a damn about the Palestinians. And his plan is to create a larger ethnic cleansing, 3 times larger, in fact, of Palestinians than actually happened in 1948. And considering that all of this conflict arises from that one single event in 1948. How much more conflict are we storing up for ourselves? Generally, even if you smash Hamas, smash Hezbollah, even if the whole place goes quiet and the whole place falls under Israeli military control and everything's quiet, you are going to store up a huge explosion in 10, 20 years down the line. So it is so imperative now that we change our thinking about Israel, that Democrats change their thinking about Israel, that progressives change their thinking about Israel. And it's so imperative, I think, that we have a clear-sighted view of actually which country we're supporting. When we say we're a friend of Israel, what sort of Israel? Are we a friend of apartheid? Are we a friend of genocide? Are we a friend of ethnic cleansing? Of course we're not. And we've got to stop thinking of Israel in these sort of idealized terms of a country that is genuinely good, but is just being overtaken, it's just been seized by the wrong sort of people. It's not that anymore. And there has to be a rethinking of the West's relationship with Israel, whatever happens to the Palestinians in Gaza, whatever happens to Hamas.
You brought. I hadn't planned on playing this for you, but you brought me here because when we're just speaking about how the Democrats need to kind of have a reckoning with liberal Zionism and with support for Israel, there is a fork in the road, and you have it's not just members of the Squad in the House or the more progressive members like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib. Some senators like Chris Van Hollen, who you wouldn't have said is going to be an advocate for Palestinians, he's diverged from his own leader in the Senate, who I like to call here Mr. 17% approval rating, Chuck Schumer. This is from a little while ago, but this is how he speaks about Israel. And you've done decades of reporting in the Middle East. This is almost indistinguishable from how every Republican speaks about both the United Nations and international aid organizations. This is under a minute, but I'd love your response here, David.
So, yes, it's very emotional. And to almost all Jewish people, we all have relatives and we know about this has happened. Again, genocide is a vicious, vicious word to use.
I will say it's a word that a UN special committee has used.
Please, the UN has been anti-Israel, anti-Semitically against Israel, double standard. Moynihan was my idol. He became famous when in 1976 they tried to pass a resolution, Zionism is racism. To say that the Jewish people should not have a state when every other people should have a state is anti-Semitism, the old double standard ipso facto. And the international organizations, I have no faith in them being fair. These same international organizations, when horrible things go in Darfur or China or whether they look the other way.
That's actually the opposite of the truth. These international organizations and the United Nations are Western in their construction by definition. And the criticism of like the ICC, for example, has been that they basically will prosecute warlords or leaders in poorer countries that the United States has problems with, and doesn't go after the people most aligned with the West when they commit human rights atrocities. But the ICC had no choice in the case of Benjamin Netanyahu, and in response, the United States is sanctioning the International Criminal Court. There's just your response to that, David, because it sounds like every Republican. Yeah.
This is a leading Democrat politician arguing against a rules-based world order.
Yep.
It's a Democrat arguing against the ICC. This is a Democrat arguing against the rule of law. Would he have said the same thing about Putin, which the ICC sanctioned within months of the attack on Ukraine? But this is unbelievable. Unbelievable. I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised by that clip. I've heard that clip before. I'm not suddenly waking up to it. But this is a really prima facie example of how that whole system of liberal Zionism is undermining itself. He said many, many claims there, which were all very, very mixed up. All about Jews' right to a homeland, all about which is Balfour. we're not talking about the Jewish right to a homeland. We're talking about the Palestinian right to a homeland as well.
Yeah.
We're not talking about the right of Jewish self-determination. I come from a family of Jewish refugees from Vienna. Half my family went to Haifa, the other half didn't. Some were Zionist, others weren't. To link what has happened to all Jews, the suffering of all Jews, to what's happening in Israel, is exactly what Israel does. And as someone who's Jewish, I'm uniquely offended by that. I have to stop frothing at the mouth almost, because I know that's not the case. I know it's not true. I know that Israel does not stand for all Jews. And there is a big, big movement of American Jews saying, not in my name. And they are at the forefront of demonstrations against Gaza. And I think that is a positive thing. I'm afraid Chuck Schumer has put himself into the dustbin of history. He's put himself, who in many ways an honorable man on many other issues, but he's put himself on Israel literally on the wrong side, and he's justifying whether you call it genocide. I'm not an international lawyer, but an awful lot of lawyers seem to think that that's a word that can only be used. But we cannot have a situation, and we cannot tolerate a situation where one politician after another, one generation of politician after another, says those sorts of things, and in so doing divides. A genocide occurred in Srebrenica. A genocide is occurring in Sudan, but it cannot happen by Israeli at the hands of Israeli troops, when there's the evidence that Gaza war is, unlike Vietnam, the most filmed and documented war ever, and the evidence of that, even from the mouths of Israeli politicians, or even from the latest opposition figure, Jacobin accused Israel of having a hobby of killing babies. If anyone else said that, you would call that anti-Semitic or blood libel. This is an Israeli politician saying this. So I think that clip shows you very, very clearly what has to change within the Democrat Party, and to change for the side of fairness, for the side of decency, and also for the sake of Israelis, and also for the sake of Jews around the world, because that sort of performance has to stop.
Yep. You mentioned Vietnam. Gaza's 141 square miles. You wrote this in your piece. In the span of 8 years, the U.S. dropped more than 5 million tons of bombs in Vietnam, making it the most bombed place on Earth. By January of this year, Israel has dropped at least 100,000 tons of bombs on Gaza. I just want to repeat that. In the span of 8 years, the U.S. dropped 5 million tons of bombs on Vietnam, a much larger swath of territory than 140-odd square miles. 100,000 tons of bombs on Gaza. Go ahead, David.
In terms of historical comparison, that is as a comparison of per square mile. Per square mile, it works out at something like 18 times as many bombs. But in terms of historical bombings that have horrified the world since, there's a massive amount of work done on the bombing of Dresden and the bombing of Hamburg, whether that was a war crime or not by the RAF. And the firebombing that took place. It turns out that if you compare the amount of bombs dropped on, American bombs generally, dropped on Gaza, that is more than was dropped on Hamburg and Dresden and Coventry in the, whatever it is, 7 years of the World War II. And that was within 2 or 3 months. So there's an immense. So, we talk about Biden's weakness. What actually happened was that Biden sanctioned this enormous dropping of American bombs. This could not have been possible before. And I don't make that claim sort of loosely or lightly. There was an Israeli general, I forget now who said, an Air Force officer who said, had America not resupplied us with those 2,000-pound bombs, we would have had to stop bombing Gaza within 2 months. So there are two elements to this war. One is the total nature of it, triggered by the Hamas attack. And the other is the length of time it has been permitted to go on. I mean, Blair stopped, well, not Blair, but he was one of the leaders who stopped an early incursion into Gaza. And just after 44 days and said, right, enough already, that's it, finished. But that hasn't happened. And so Israel has behaved, and Netanyahu has behaved in a way that is completely predictable with his alliances and with what he says. What is I couldn't have predicted in October 2023 is how long the West, America, Britain, France, would have tolerated this. Now they're coming to the end of it. But why has it taken so long and so many deaths to do so?
And to wrap up with you, David, you also write about how despite kind of some lip service from Mohammed bin Salman and other leaders in the neighboring countries, they're doing these deals with Donald Trump, these financial deals with him, without really meaningfully addressing Palestinian plight. There's like a political situation for these undemocratic leaders in the Middle East, which, by the way, the United States props up because it's much more streamlined if we can give military aid to these these monarchs, essentially, than actually encouraging democracy in the Middle East, which is it's just so crazy how opposite of the truth it is. But what is the complicity of these leaders in the region who have basically publicly supported Palestinians, but have privately been more than happy to kind of do deals both with Israel and the United States, because that's where the money is?
Yeah, I think there are two things. That one, they represent a new generation of autocrat. Their fathers had the Palestinian issue, stamped on their brow. This generation has, YouTube and TikTok stamped on their brow. They're not interested, and they don't regard the Palestinian issue as remotely theirs. They're interested in making money, and they think that, they calculate that, in fact, a so-called normalization with Israel is the route to Washington's heart. And so they use this strategy. Mohammed bin Zayed, who's the president of the United Arab Emirates, introduced a young and unknown prince who was then called Mohammed bin Salman to the Trump clan, before Trump's first term, basically through Israel. Bin Salman visited Netanyahu several times secretly, and courted pro-Israeli opinion in America by saying he personally didn't give a damn what happens to the Palestinians. And that was very, very much the formula of the Abraham Accords, which was to sort of pave over or cement over the Palestinian problem, and use Palestinians as sort of Gastarbeiter, as foreign workers across the Arab world. The tragedy of the Palestinian conflict has always been that Arab rulers have sold them down the river, and they're doing the same thing now. They managed to turn temporarily the U.S. the policy on bombing Yemen. That has stopped, which is a good thing. And they turned and they persuaded Trump not to assassinate Ahmed Shara, who's the new leader of Syria, that Israel definitely wants to depose and divide into three, but to support him and remove sanctions. Although whether the sanctions will actually be removed is a different matter. It takes a long time to do that. But not a word about Palestine. And I think it's a day of shame for the Arab leaders, because quite apart from anything else, forget humanity or forget moral principles. If you have 2 million Palestinians floating around the space, having been ejected from Palestine, they'll go anywhere, and they will disrupt the stability of any of their, polite little rich states, because they will be a force of destabilization. And that is about the last thing these rulers want. I mean, the real problem, one last comment, the real problem about normalization is it is a deal, as you said, between a deeply dubious Israeli leadership or ideologically motivated right-wing Israeli leadership that wants to recreate the borders of Greater Israel, and people with almost no legitimacy, people who are rulers simply because they are the sons of other rulers, and what they fear through normalizing with Israel is a revolt of their own population, because and Mohammed bin Salman has actually admitted this. He said, I couldn't sign a normalization deal with Israel. Otherwise, I might meet the same fate as Anwar Sadat, who was shot. And it's true. And he would meet the same fate. That's true.
Right. But then that's what the conclusion of what you're saying is that if Israel is only accepting an ethnic cleansing plan for the Palestinians, and these Arab rulers are doing this secretly because they're fearful of the backlash with their population, but they don't want to take on millions of Palestinian refugees to absorb them into their countries, that it feels like a handshake agreement for genocide then. Yes, it is.
It is. And the only thing stopping genocide, or the major thing stopping genocide, is the determination of Palestinians. And I've met who say, I will rather die on my land than leave. And if you go around the West Bank, where they're being ejected from their farms on hillsides in South Hebron, and they're not Hamas, they haven't got a gun there, and they're facing armed settlers. That's what they say. That's what they do. They die on their land rather than leave. And I think Gaza will do the same thing. I'm surprised that Gaza has held out for as long as it has. I'm surprised there aren't more anti-Hamas demonstrations taking place. I'm really surprised that this has gone on, because this is like being starved into submission. But we're under a big illusion if we think we've got rid of resistance groups by doing this. I think you've just handed the torch to an even more violent generation. The Fatah will not benefit, or the Palestinian Authority will not benefit if Hamas is crushed. Quite the reverse.
Well, David, I really appreciate your time today.
Sorry for being so gloomy. I mean,
but overall, it is so much suffering. But in terms of the overarching theme of your piece, like they're winning these battles. They will win every battle. Like Palestine doesn't have an air force. Doesn't have an airport. A lack of symmetry here. They control the borders of the area that they're bombing. Like, there's no way for this to be an equivalent military conflict. And yet, overall, because of the barbarity, I think you're right in the overarching view of Israel's loss here. David, thanks so much for your time today. Middle East Eye does wonderful work. Everybody should check it out. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Emma.
All right, quick break. And when we come back, we're going to be speaking with Benjamin Fogel. We are back, and we are joined now by Benjamin Fogel, South African journalist, contributing editor at Jacobin, and the head of publishing at the Alameda Institute. Ben, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And we're so glad that we were able to get you, given the display at the White House yesterday. But before we get to that, can you give everybody some context as to the political situation in South Africa right now? There were elections last year. What were the results of those elections, and how does that inform the current context?
It's actually quite interesting because last year we had historic elections. These elections were historic because the ruling African National Congress lost its majority. Its share of the vote fell below 50% for the first time. This is the party that has governed South Africa since 1994. It's the party of Nelson Mandela. It's the party that you could almost guarantee was going to win an absolute majority every election. So what happened? Instead of disorder, we had a rather orderly, in global standards at least, even if it was somewhat dysfunctional in terms of how things came together, a coalition government was formed. A coalition government that includes multiple parties, includes the largest opposition party, the Democratic Alliance, which is a party that is associated with white voters, with other minority voters, including coloreds and Indians. It includes the IFP, which was a party once in a sort of low state of civil war with the ANC during the 1980s. The Zulu Nationalist Party includes smaller right-wing parties, includes the PAC, the Pan-Africanist Congress, parties the center-left, center-right. It's quite of a diverse coalition. Since then, this coalition government has been trying to find its way with more than a few hiccups, and it is almost a year to the day since the election, and South Africa is sort of in this uneasy position in which we have a lot of uncertainty because of the economic situation. We have a lot of worries that perhaps we will lose trade with the United States. The preferential trade deal has existed for quite a while, and that might adversely affect our export sectors. We also have a number of problems, of course, facing the country, ranging from poverty, inequality, broken infrastructure, and many other problems that plague a great many developing countries. But in South Africa, we have for the first time a multi-party coalition government that includes parties that, even if they are racialized, are seen to represent all races, even including, to a degree, an Afrikaner nationalist party, the Freedom Front Plus. So it's quite bizarre that we have seen, given that we have a coalition government, this increased and outrageous, in my opinion, intensification of a disinformation and an anti-South African diplomatic campaign from the Trump White House since he took power.
And the history, I feel like, is here is really important too, because prior to Ramaphosa becoming president, there was this guy called Jacob Zuma who was quite corrupt, right? And tarnished the reputation of the ANC. How did his period of like mass privatization and corruption create the environment for there to be a more coalition government in the last elections? Was that a big part of it?
So firstly, I wouldn't characterize mass privatization as something which really happened under the Zuma government. What happened was, indeed, we embarked on an intensification of investment in terms of infrastructure, in things geared up to increase state capacity and development, from trains to ports. It just so happened that was part of a project to channel public monies into private coffers. This is what we refer to as state capture in South Africa. It refers in particular to the role played by politically connected businessmen, most notoriously the clan of Indian businessmen, of third-rate Indian businessmen called the Guptas, who had a special relationship with the president and to a degree dictated both state policy and cabinet appointments for quite some time. So Zuma, who took power in 2009 as president, he was elected in that year and governed until 2018, effectively we sometimes refer to as 10 lost years. The core institutions of the country, from the tax collection service to the parastatals, the state-owned enterprise that run transportation, that run energy, that run water, were run into the ground, handed over to politically connected figures who were working on behalf of various interests to sabotage and fill the coffers of various foreign bank accounts. There was also a concerted propaganda effort done by a notorious British PR firm called Bell Pottinger, a firm linked to the Thatcher government, as well as the Pinochet regime, which came up with a spin for this era. This spin was that Jacob Zuma, rather than stealing from the poor to benefit politically connected businessmen, was enacting radical economic transformation, a sort of redistributive program to benefit the black majority. But there was, rather contrary to some of the myths out there, a mass movement that emerged. It started among middle class and more elite South Africans, but then included the working class, including COSATU, South Africa's largest trade federation, which was present at the meeting yesterday. And there were protests on the street, and effectively Zuma was removed before the 2019 election by the ANC because they felt he would be such a liability in that election that it would cost them votes. So Cyril Ramaphosa, who's a very interesting figure in his own right, who was deputy president there, effectively led that campaign at the end part and became president. Now, he then basically regained some of the ground lost by Zuma in the 2019 election. But since then, things haven't been so rosy. He promised to deliver an anti-corruption campaign, a restoration of state capacity, a prosecution of those responsible for state capture, some redistribution, but a combination between unable to move beyond the factional politics of the African National Congress, COVID, that thing that we might remember, and some other unfortunate external economic factors, as well as some own goals, made his first term quite difficult. Things did not get better. Those responsible for state capture were not prosecuted. The economic performance has been less than desirable. And there hasn't been the change that was promised. As a result, South African voters, as you would expect in a democracy, many of them decided to cast a ballot against the ANC for the first time, or stay at home, or exercise a democratic right to choose something else. And it was clear that the ANC, even if it received the majority of votes, did not have a mandate to form a government by its own, so it formed a coalition. Now, there is a lot more to cover in this period, but that's a brief history of where we are to this day.
I appreciate that context, because then we can, I think, move to yesterday to just let's take a look at how Ramaphosa, the South African president, responded to a question by Donald Trump about this notion of white genocide in South Africa. This is number 8 here. We'll start with 8 and then do 9. I'd love your reaction, Ben, to this. This is this exchange at the White House yesterday where he tried to Zelensky, the South African president, but he was a little bit more prepared.
Point out, it's worse than what happened to Zelensky. In fact, I've never seen this before. Who prepares a sort of mini documentary, an ambush for a diplomatic meeting in front of the press? This is something that, I mean, maybe somewhere it's happened, but I have never seen in all my years of observing politics anything quite like this.
Here it is, Donald Trump and the president of South Africa.
At this time, what will it take for you to be convinced that there's no white genocide in South Africa?
Well, I can answer that for President. It's for him. No, seriously.
I'd rather have him answer.
Yeah, I'd rather answer that. It will be.
Our president will respond to you.
Yeah,
Thank you, Mr. President.
It will take President Trump listening to the voices of South Africans, some of whom are his good friends, like those who are here. When we have talks between us around a quiet table, it will take President Trump to listen to them. I'm not going to be repeating what I've been saying. I would say if there was Afrikaner farmer genocide, I can bet you these three gentlemen would not be here, including my Minister of Agriculture. He would not be with me. So it'll take him, President Trump, listening to their stories, to their perspective. That is the answer to your question.
But, Mr. President, I must say that we have, wait. We have thousands of stories talking about it. Sure. And we have documentaries, we have news stories, and that. Is Natalie here? Somebody here to turn that? I could show you.
We have a PowerPoint.
I have to, it has to be responded to.
Yeah, sure.
Let me see the articles, please, if you would, and turn the lights down.
Okay, all right. So we this is him. Let's just skip ahead then to what's being referred to there, where later. So they set this up, showing that like is this the part where they show what they claim are bodies that aren't? Is this it, Russ?
Those are like articles that Trump has printed out.
Yeah, so there's the articles, and there was a clip shown before that in which there was a whole segment in which they show a bunch of crosses on a road, which is the one that really started this.
Oh, yes. Yes, here it is. This is we can just see even the freeze frame of what Trump pulls up there. I think people get the idea.
Those were actual graves. And
yeah.
Those were not graves, by the way. They were crosses.
Can you say what that was, Ben?
Yeah, this was a stunt. I mean, basically, this is not a gravesite. This is a road. There had been a protest organized by a certain group after the killing of two farmers. And what they did is they got a drone, which is you're watching, and they set a bunch of cars up, and they put a bunch of white crosses supposedly to symbolize the victims of this fake genocide. I can go very firmly and state there is no genocide happening. So this is the sort of stunt that's been used to get international media coverage. It's obviously playing off the very symbolic and powerful messaging of, white crosses, victims, these stories. It's part of a campaign in which really uses the Human Rights Charter and the tradition of opposing genocide, which has been tarnished in the West most recently. And
important to note that Israel is the South Africa is launched the case in the ICJ accusing Israel of genocide. These claims of white genocide precede that, but it's important to note that as the West helps commit genocide, they're accusing the nation that's calling out that genocide via the International Court of Justice of doing so falsely.
There's no coincidence that's happening in this way. But anyway, basically, just to explain the context behind this. So even the Farmers' Rights Organization, the right-wing organization that has been at the forefront of this and has had probably overstated, but access to the insiders of the MAGA world, AfriForum, which claims to be a civil rights group representing Afrikaners as a persecuted minority. They don't say there's a genocide happening. They say there's a risk of genocide happening because, by any measure, there isn't enough people being killed to amount to genocide. But let's put into perspective. South Africa, unfortunately, is a very, very violent country, as some of the guests from South Africa in the White House pointed out. There were about 23,000 murders in South Africa last year. There's a population of over 60 million, and that's really bad. It's one of the worst in the world. And the overwhelming number of victims are poor and black, or colored as well. The most dangerous place in the country, as Johan Rupert, South Africa's richest man, actually referred to yesterday, is ruled by the opposition party. It's Cape Town, the Cape Flats, which is a majority colored area. But yeah, so there's a lot of violence in South Africa. And yes, farmers are killed. There are at times attacks, there's brutal attacks, but there is no evidence that there's anything beyond criminal attacks going on. In fact, the most recent numbers that I will bring up from last year indicated that out of these 23,000, oh, it was over 23,000 murders, there were 44 killings of people within the farming community, according to the official police stats, which will be rejected, of course, by the propagandists, 8 of which were farmers. The Transvaal Agricultural Union, which represents farmers, has compiled different figures, which say there were 23 white people killed in farms last year. So it's important to say that farm attacks, there are many black farmers too. There are more white farmers, but some of the victims of farm attacks are black as well. And a number of the reasons that there are farm attacks, and sometimes they're incredibly brutal, this is something that can't be denied, is that farmers are vulnerable. They live in isolated areas. They are far from, some security services. There's great expanses of land in South Africa, and they present an attractive target. Often the farms are located quite close to urban areas, so the peri-urban areas, people can make their way. There used to be, for instance, attacks on farmers to gain firearms. People knew that farmers had firearms and this be used in other crimes. So yes, they are real security risks to farmers, but this is criminal, and this is not in any way tantamount to an organized campaign of mass killing of white people. Furthermore, one of the other points that was repeatedly made in this press conference or theatrical show, or whatever you want to call it, this farce, was that there is active expropriation of white farmers' land going on. That is simply not true, and even AfriForum will agree with me on this. There is not any active expropriation going on. What has happened is there is rhetoric from certain political parties and certain political figures calling for expropriation. At times they use sort of violent imagery. And second of all, there has been an amendment in American terms, a change to our constitution with a new piece of legislation which facilitates the expropriation of land for public use as exists in most countries. Now, this is not a government policy of expropriation. And furthermore, it was implied that somehow the sort of nightmare Zimbabwe scenario, which is not happening in South Africa, that the people attacking the farmers are getting their land. That's not happening at all. There is no case of this. So I hope that clarifies things for any confused listeners.
Well, I mean, it's less than 1% of the population. That doesn't mean that it wouldn't be a genocide by definition. But as you say, this is a few dozen white farmers that have been killed over this period.
This is just the last year. So,
just the last year. Right.
Yeah. So again, if we go over enough, we have many more names. And again, yes, they're more likely to be attacked than, say, in some ways, and some people living in urban areas. As I pointed out, there's reasons for that. And secondly, again, South Africa is a violent place, but the most likely guy to get murdered in South Africa, who is a black or colored man living in a working class area in Durban or Cape Town between 1825. And unfortunately, these victims are not recorded as worthy of any international attention. And moreover, the implication behind the accusation of genocide is there is an active state policy. There is state support for this. There simply is no evidence of that. I mean,
but they're conflating, right, the land reform with genocide. If you could expand on what the land reform is and why it's basically captured the imagination of white supremacists so that they call it genocide.
Well, there's a few things. First of all, the land reform hasn't started yet. This bill that has happened was only passed earlier this year. I mean, I think it was last year, actually. So this is a piece of legislation that's very recent. Two, it's always, a radical threat that, this is part of the nature of decolonization, which happens with liberation movements. There's always, the active dispossession is one of the original sins of colonialism, of the dispossession of the natives, and there needs to be land reform, and sometimes that includes, in some cases, more radical versions than others. What is true is that the pace of land reform in South Africa, and land reform is a very complicated issue in South Africa, includes the issue of what we call traditionally held land, which is communally held land owned by traditional leaders who are often very oppressive too. But the pace of land reform in South Africa has simply been too slow. It's been one of the glaring failures of the ANC since 1994 is land reform. So with the white supremacist imagination, you have to look at what happened in other countries. It's not happened in South Africa, but they will refer to Zimbabwe. They will refer to what happened in Algeria. The image of, the violent sort of fake Fanonian reading of The Wretched of the Earth, of the natives taking back their land through violence, through collective dispossession, this cathartic act from the whites, which is a classic, specter of the, white supremacist colonial imagination. You have other versions, in Reconstruction, right? This is the origin of the Ku Klux Klan. Yep. The, repression of, the former slaves who wanted a piece of land and the right to dignity and the right to full citizenship. This is, these things go together. So in South Africa, what they refer to is by a deliberate disinformation campaign that confuses and conflates these issues. They refer in particular to the specter of what happened in Zimbabwe, where there was a violent campaign. There's debates on the exact nature of it, but there were, from so-called war veterans who seized these farms on behalf, as part of a state-supported policy of redistribution in the name of, liberation. There were the white farmers lost their land. The farms were redistributed often to politically connected elites. And Zimbabwe, for a variety of reasons, had one of the worst economic collapses on record. And they refer to that, which is a very different situation in a very different country to South Africa, as evidence of the nightmare of land reform. But to reiterate, South Africa remains a constitutional democracy. There are laws, as pointed out, to protect property rights. There's been a very slow pace of land reform, and there's nobody in power who's leading a campaign to occupy and seize people's lands. Now, the other thing, which I will sort of preempt, but point to, is most of the clips that were shown in that video were of a small opposition party called the Economic Freedom Fighters, and they leader Julius Malema. Now, this party is not in power. It lost 3 or 4% of its votes in the last election, and has never looked weaker and more isolated than it does now. So it remains to be restated. This is the rhetoric of an opposition party that is not in power.
Okay, so there is this like a kind of version of what we've seen with Elon Musk's association with the AfD in Germany, where this is like a radical right-wing party that isn't yet in power, but that you have like outsized influence by billionaires and by wealthy people in the world trying to inflate their standing or their level of importance?
It's complicated. Now, the EFF, it's one of their ways of mobilizing support by playing into the sort of very sort of violent performative rhetoric. It's a way of like differentiating themselves. But it's also, it harkens to certain traditions within the ANC. The EFF is a split from the ANC that are frustrated with the slow pace of transformation, as I say, and land reform and real problems with inequality in South Africa. But I will point to something which I think to zoom out a bit, because South African politics are very complicated. I'm also a scholar of Brazil, and it's often said that Brazil is not for beginners, but I will say South Africa, it's ready only for experts. It's a very complicated country to the minutiae and the details, but South Africa occupies a particular place in the reactionary imagination today. There's no coincidence. There's a deliberate campaign to inflate, to depict South Africa as some sort of dystopian hellhole. And that's not to deny we have very real problems. But the reason for this is, in many ways, the transition to democracy in South Africa, our 1994 moment, is seen as the high point of sort of that moment of liberalism of the 90s, that moment in which there was a hope for democracy, for a spread through peaceful means of universal values. This was the high point of this. This is the mythology about the Mandela miracle. This is the Rainbow Nation. This is, South African miracle. This is something very close to, for instance, Joe Biden always used to inflate and even lie about his connections to South Africa. But there's a reason for that.
Joe Biden lied about his record? I mean, that's, I'm joking. I'm being sarcastic.
Yeah, there's this whole thing he claims had been stoned in South Africa or been something like that, which is, you have to look it up. Anyway.
I mean, you can go back to his plagiarism. The guy, it's kind of a thing for him. But anyway, keep going.
Yeah, he plagiarized Neil Kinnock, a twice loser of in the UK elections. Anyway, to go back to South Africa, because of the role played by South Africa and the liberal imagination, for hardcore reactionaries, both the neo variant, which has emerged, and those who are sort of more paleo, who go back to people like Pat Buchanan, or go back to in the Reaganite movement, which there was support for South Africa, Grover Norquist, people like that who worked for the South African government doing propaganda campaigns. There is this connection to this. But South Africa serves as sort of like the nightmare. This is the DEI nightmare for the right now. South Africa is being portrayed as a hellhole because it's seen as the sort of culmination of the sort of DEI politics of multiculturalism. This is the nightmare. And moreover, despite it being bizarre, it's a black majority country, it is the great replacement. It's when white people are replaced by black people. That's why they're into Rhodesia, which is even more absurd. It's only like 200,000 white Rhodesians at its high point. And this is why South Africa is, it's the nightmare. It's the great replacement. And this is why the Afrikaner refugees are so important, because this is connected to our vision of America. Now, it's obviously all absurd and also linked to punishing South Africa for the ICJ, or a bipartisan distaste for some of our diplomatic positions, because, the Democrats were very angry with us too about the way where we stood on the Ukraine-Russia war, where we've stood on the ICJ. But I will point, South Africa is now being portrayed by the likes of Elon and by people in these various far-right circles, particularly online, in these journals, as the great replacement, DEI dystopia.
And they're equating reforms to help Black South Africans with genocide. I read some statistic that 70% of farmland in South Africa is owned by white people, and white people are less than 10% of the population. Do those numbers seem right to you?
Yes, it's a little more complex, but I would put reforms that haven't happened yet, which makes it even worse.
Right.
There has been no active change to our land reform process, which is still based on willing buyer, willing seller, which means what it says, and has been very slow and pretty much is regarded as kind of a failure. It's not been happening. As you pointed out, the land ownership statistics haven't changed. Yes, in terms of privately owned land, that's arable. That is correct, but that also doesn't include community-owned land and state-owned land. So it gets a bit more confusing. And community-owned land is its own. That would take me like a whole history seminar to explain. But in terms of privately owned arable farmland farms, that is correct. But
Gotcha.
It's also evidence that the land reform hasn't really been happening.
Right. Well, and the piece that they're hung up on is the abandoned land that could be taken by the government. Is my understanding? Is that part of it?
Yes, which also already existed in South African law. They just updated it from apartheid era law. But name me a country in the world which doesn't have a public use expropriation bill. Hey, the United States is, if you have oil or minerals on your land, you get expropriated. It happens all the time.
Trump was trying to build a border wall through people's backyards down in Texas, and is that Texan genocide? It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, it exists because, again, the U.S., if you go through American literature series, you always have people losing their farmland because, raw materials were discovered. It's a classic story. This is hardly a unique law. But again, this is a recently passed law. Nothing has happened yet. It's the implied threat, along with the rhetoric of some figures within politics, that's being used as evidence. And even when you push them on it, when you push AfriForum and co on it, they won't say there is a genocide. They say there's a risk of genocide, an increasing risk of genocide.
Well, really appreciate you coming on today, Ben, and explaining this to us. Benjamin Fogel, you can check out his work over at Jacobin. And then also, Ben, you're the head of publishing at the Alameda Institute, and people can look at your work over there as well. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Well, I'm glad always to represent South Africa and try explain away some of the systemic confusion about it. Because I mean, frankly, what we saw yesterday, I hope it registered to Americans, and I'll have to defer to you guys on this, that was a absurd low point for diplomacy.
Yeah.
And at the same time, as you pointed out, we have horrific news by the day out of Gaza of mass starvation, 10,000 children at risk of dying, and then we have like the world's most well-fed and prosperous refugees arriving, and very many of them being exposed as serial scammers running away from debts with the special treatment.
It's insane. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it, Ben. All right, folks. With that, we're going to wrap up the free part of the show, head into the fun half, where we will have some fun. We probably won't take any calls. We went over a little bit. And I have like I got to jump at 2:25-ish. So we will read your IMs, though, in the fun half. Matt, what's happening on your show?
Yeah, Left Reckoning Tuesday actually had a opening of the show based on this, going into Stephen Miller, big Camp of the Saints fan, which is a novel by French white supremacists about the sort of faceless hordes pouring into the white world, and being unable to stop it. And it ultimately, it's a thing that drives this white genocide sort of hysteria by Afrikaners and white supremacists in South Africa. And it also is basically the world that Israel is creating for itself, where it has for decades treated the place that the land that it's on as a place to conquer, and views demographics as the imperative. So we can't have all these Palestinians here, and it's the exact same sort of, we can't have birth, we can't have like children growing up and birth rates that are outnumbering ours. And that is a white supremacist ideology that is the through line there. So check that out, patreon.com/leftreckoning.
Yes, please. Do that. And
can I do a Rust plug while
Yeah.
Matt brings in these other guys? So I before I started working here, I used to do a podcast called the New Yorker Political Scene, where I would basically react to and sort of insert myself through the magic of editing into the New Yorker's Washington politics roundtable. I have been a little too busy to keep up with it since I've started this job, but I just could not help myself this week because Evan Osnos, who wrote a very famous book about Joe Biden and also wrote a profile of Joe Biden that came out in March of last year, was talking to Susan Glasser and Jane Mayer about this reckoning over the way they covered Biden and his mental acuity. So you can find it wherever you listen to podcasts, the New Yorker Political Scene. I guess I'll put a link in the
put a link in the description.
Show. And I probably won't be able to do it every...
We have to keep this off. We have echo.
Oh. Probably won't be able to do it every week, but follow the show, and when I do have time to get back to regular schedule, you will be in the loop.
All right. Link below to that. And hello to Brandon and Binder. What's up, guys?
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm very busy. I think I've told you guys I'm getting married in like 3 weeks at this point, and I am so ready for it to be over. So sorry about no calls. I have all these appointments I have to do. I gotta go get fitted. I gotta get my hair done. I gotta like whatever. It's just insane. So we're gonna wrap at like 2:25-ish. Matt Binder, what's happening on your shows?
Yeah, this has been busy too. I actually did not have a show last night. YouTube.com/Matt Binder tonight. Leftist Mafia. I guess I'll really quickly use this opportunity. You have a wedding coming up. I'll just announce now that I have a third child on the way. So I will be
Binder.
So it's coming up. Everybody who knows, who needs to know, knows. I actually ran into Sam at the Zeteo event a couple of weeks ago. So I told him then. So if I'm absent for like a week or two, it's because of that. I don't think I will be though.
When are we talking?
Oh, we're talking soon. Like literally, the due date's June 13th.
Wow.
That's what it means to be a mighty man of valor.
Yes. All right. Well, you have to. You need a shofar. This is what you need.
That's a real thing.
Congrats, buddy. That's awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. Well, Brandon, your news sucks compared to
Follow that
this.
Well, I'll have you know, I haven't been too busy to stream. And so I have been. In fact, just this morning before I came on here, we were watching the incredibly bizarre press conference between the South African president, Cyril Ramaphosa, and Donald Trump, which we were able to use as a useful vehicle to critique the mythology of white genocide and also talk about the reality of crime and what actually causes it, not just in South Africa, but, you know, all across the world. And I think tomorrow we're going to learn about ghosts.
Ooh.
I don't know a lot about ghosts. I'm not like a ghost enthusiast. I'm ghost agnostic. I'm going to do a pun there, but it wouldn't have worked. So yeah, we're going to learn about ghosts tomorrow. So be there or be square. Find me on YouTube. Find me on Twitch.
All right. We will head into the fun half then. See you there.
Okay, Emma, please.
Well, I feel that my voice is sorely lacking on the majority report.
Wait, look, Sam is unpopular.
I do deserve a vacation at Disney World. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome Emma to the show.
It is Thursday.
I think you need to take over for Sam.
Yes, please.
No. I'm gonna pause you right there.
Wait, what?
You can't encourage Emma to live like this. And I'll tell you why. So was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. So was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
What?
Tour, sushi, and poker.
Tim's upset.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. So was offered a tour, sushi, and
that's what we call the biz.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Right.
Tour, sushi, and poker.
We're gonna get demonetized.
I just think that what you did to Tim Pool was mean.
Free speech.
That's not what we're about here. Look at how sad he's become now. You shouldn't even talk about it. I think you're responsible.
I probably am in a certain way, but let's get to the meltdown here.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Oh my God.
Tour,
wow.
Sushi. I'm sorry, I'm losing my fucking mind. So was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Logic.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Boy. Tour. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a kid. Tour. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a little kid. Had this debate 7,000 times. A little kid. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a kid. Tour. I'm losing my fucking mind.
Some people just don't understand.
So I'm not trying to be a dick right now, but like, I absolutely think the U.S. should be providing me with a wife and kids.
That's not what we're talking about here. Okay, all right.
It's not a fun job. Tour.
That's a real thing.